Professor Shulman, it has been a great privilege for me to ask you about Kutiyattam, your experiences with Kutiyattam. What you've been coming here for the last 6 years now to Kerala to understand Kutiyattam, to experience Kutiyattam. What was the impetus what made you come and fall so much in love with this form?
That's certainly the right word. I fell in love. One falls in love without a reason. If you have a reason, you can't fall in love.
That's true.
But I can tell you how it happened. I had seen Kutiyattam several times before over the years, in different places, including Irinyalakuda, and also in the States I liked it, but I hadn't fully been captivated by it.
Yes.
But in 2006 I saw Nangir Kuti, just 2 hours, performed by Dr. G. Indu at Angamali at a conference. And it took me, I was coming from Andhra Pradesh actually. I landed in Angamali. Within a few minutes they began this Nangir Kuti. She was doing Putana Moksha. The first hour I hardly noticed it. My mind was still full of all kinds of Telugu things, but then I opened my eyes and I saw her dancing. I thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. So then we spoke to her after the performance, and she asked us to come to Murikulam the next day, my colleagues and myself. We went there, and there, we talked to her and we heard from her this thing that one hears actually from everybody, which is that there's no scope for full-scale performances, that they have to make do with very small little segments of an hour or 2 or 3. So I said to my colleagues, we must find some way to enable them to make full-scale performances again. I didn't know how to do it. I wanted to bring our students to Kerala to see it. I went to the president of the Hebrew University and I told him about Kutiyattam. I said there's this classical tradition and it's endangered, and I explained to him what it meant and the beauty of it, and he understood. I said I need $10,000 to take my students, advanced Sanskrit students, to Kerala to see a performance and to pay the actors their fee. And he gave me that money. It was an amazing thing, yeah. That was how it began. And then from there it went on and we got further grants and things like that. Yeah.
To go back to that experience that you had for the first time when Dr. Indu was performing, how much could you understand, because it's also highly coded language, in spite of the text being in Sanskrit, how much could you, what was the experience of seeing that in a more specific way?
I think at that time, and also the next time when we actually came and saw a complete performance, we saw Shokavanikangam, I think, I knew nothing of the Abhinaya, or next to nothing. And I couldn't really decipher the mudras. But Putana Moksham, there's a lot of what you could call something like mime. It's very intelligible in a way.
That is true.
You could understand. It was not so hard to understand what she was doing.
Okay.
So yeah. Later when we came back in 2008 with a group of students. So then the Nepatya people, that is Madhu and Indu, they of course introduced us gradually to the whole thing, and they prepared materials for us. There was a booklet following the Arta Prakaram with the course of each night's performance, and they would every day give us a lesson in the Abhinaya and take us through that night's performance. And little by little we came to learn the language. We learned. They began teaching us the Ramayana Sankshepam, so we can. And we can do it. Some of us, and some of my students in particular, are very good at that. We slowly came to learn that language.
I think in the process you devised the new learning methodology, I think, because that to learn that way, once you read the text, the performance text, then see the mudras in the morning, see the way the mudras evolved in the morning, and then see the same performance in the evening. I think that's a perfect way, I think, to understand, to learn, imbibe the beauties of the form, I think.
It's a good way. We don't always remember everything that we see in the morning when it comes to the actual performance in the evening. But by now, we
Yes,
can read
yeah.
this language by now. Little by little, we came to understand it. And, we also discuss with them what they think it's all about, what is happening. There's 1,000 technical questions that are of interest.
Right.
It took some time. By now, we have some idea.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So this has also led you to research into the history of Kutiyattam and also to the textual tradition, the prabandhas,
Yeah.
in a very more in-depth way. So
Actually, I want to write a short book about the performances that I've seen.
Okay.
It will not be an introductory book on Kutiyattam. Your book is there. There are also other books available. I don't think there's a need for something like that now, but there's
Yes,
not
exactly.
very few attempts to give what I would think of as like a sustained interpretation of an actual full-scale performance. How it's put together, what the structure of it is, what the expressivity is, what it's trying to tell us, how it fits with the other Kutiyattam plays, the intertextual side of it, and the sources, all of that.
Yes.
So I'm hoping to write I don't know enough, but I'm hoping to write a book about maybe 3 or 4 of the performances that we've seen. I gave a series of lectures in Paris just a few months ago about these performances, actually.
Okay.
So it's sort of, if I have a few months that are relatively free,
Yes.
I'll complete this maybe.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Now that you're taught into writing and meditating more about it, do you think? How do you think has this evolved? Would you consider this a breakaway from the predominant Natya Shastra tradition, or do you think it is a local adaptation? What would your interpretation be on how it became this kind of a form?
I think this is very much of a Kerala art form. It's a South Indian art form. It has very archaic elements. Some of them go back to Natya Shastra. There's no doubt about that. The performers like to say it. Everyone likes to say about Kutiyattam that it's a very, very ancient tradition and it's survived only in Kerala. There's some truth in that. That is, there are many things that we can say that go back to the early sources, and including technical devices, structural elements in the performance. There are all kinds of things that we can recognize from the Natya Shastra and also from Abhinavagupta's commentary on the Natya Shastra. There's quite a lot.
So texts like Kuttanimata, all that, people
Kuttanimata,
keep striving to make connections.
And the Dasharupaka, these later dramaturgical texts, all of that is there. But having said that, see, I don't know how it happened exactly, but I think that over some generations, beginning perhaps around the 11th century or 12th century, something like that, there were perhaps several generations of extremely gifted, experimentally daring dramaturgists and actors here in Kerala.
Yes.
Chakyars, but they were no doubt closely associated also with other groups, especially Nambudiris. They experimented and they very radically revised the whole structure of the performance. So, and that's really what we see. When we see Kutiyattam, what we see a continuous tradition with very archaic elements, but with a kind of new configuration that took shape, crystallized, sometime in the medieval period, I think maybe around the 11th, 12th century, something like that, and took its final form, the form that we see today, even a little bit later, maybe 15th, 16th century, Yeah.
So between the 11th and the 15th centuries, a great transformation may have taken place both in the textual, that is the performance text, Atiprakaram tradition,
Yes.
and also in the performance tradition.
Totally. They experimented, these people.
Yes.
They took, first of all, they took the plays apart so that only this individual act is the unit of performance, That's one thing. But then even then, the anka, the act, is not performed in a linear way.
Yes.
We all know they've completely reconceived the whole idea of it. So you have your Purupada and then the Nirvahanam, which includes all kinds of internal embedded things, and eventually you move into the actual Kutiyattam at the end. All of this has some meaning. It's not by chance that they've done it. They've thought about it, and they played and experimented with it. Actually, one of the things in Kutiyattam that is very striking is that it continually surprises you. I find myself always surprised. Even though I've seen by now hundreds of hours of Kutiyattam, I find it surprising.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Also, how so many from other sources, so many other sources, things. I mean, poems were taken, verses were taken, and how about the three, 4, 5 languages used. And it's a marvel in that kind of.
Yeah, that's true. It varies again from play to play, of course. But yes, that is of course the case. Actually, it's a Sanskrit drama, no doubt. But the real language of Kutiyattam is Malayalam. That's the true language.
Statement.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful statement.
Yeah, it's a Malayalam play. The Arthaprakaram language is what they use. They talk about it. Basically, it's a kind of Malayalam. Even the Sanskrit, in many ways, is a kind of Sanskrit Malayalam or Malayali Sanskrit or something like that. Very often you can see. I think the plays also, with only 2 exceptions perhaps, I think they're all Kerala plays to begin with. The so-called Bhasa plays, I don't think they're connected to Bhasa, but it doesn't matter. They're local Kerala productions, I think. And of course the Shakti Bhadra corpus and the 2 Kulashekara plays.
Yes.
The only possible exceptions are the Naganandam, but the Naganandam, it's a play about Kerala. Yes. It's entirely about Kerala, and I mean, for some reason because of that, I think they somehow assimilated it to the tradition. And then, if you want,
what about the other 2, the Bhagavad Ajukam?
Yes, so Bhagavad Ajukam and Madhavilasa. Again, they're a possible exception if you think of the Tamil country as different from Kerala, which it is.
Cannot have it.
It was somewhat different, I suppose. Those are the only exceptions.
Yes.
And even the Kutiyattam tradition itself says that they gave up on producing the Shakuntalam. They have a whole story about that.
That was the question I was going to ask you. How do you think is that Kalidasa's plays were not found that much of favor in, whereas bhasas or whatever we are ascribing as bhasas have become very popular on the stage?
See, if you look at the current repertoire, let's look at these so-called bhasa plays. Take the Abhishek Narakam, which is a very popular, the 2 acts that they do, that's very important. Or the Shakti Bhadra play. I think these were plays that were written for a kind of proto-Kutiyattam performance to begin with. That's why they performed them. They were produced by actors, perhaps chakyars, something like that, by poets writing for something like that. I have a very good student in Jerusalem, Tamar, who wrote a MA dissertation about the Tapati Samvaranamu. That's also her claim. She says that the whole of the first act of the Tapati Samvaranamu, it's a Kutiyattam play, even if you only look at the Sanskrit text.
Written for Kutiyattam.
Yeah, written for Kutiyattam. She read also the Vyangya Vyakya on that first act, and it's very clear if you go deeply into the way that text is set out, you can see that it's meant for this kind of performance. The Kalidasa plays were not meant for this kind of performances. I don't know how they were performed, I don't know. But if you look at the Shakuntala, it's a single, aesthetic work meant to be performed in its entirety.
In a different way, in an entire way. Not
maybe,
by ankas and
no. And not maybe in one night, maybe it was spread over a week or 2. I don't know how they did it, no one knows. But if you look at the Shakti Bhadra plays, it's not like that. They're individualized units. And they're, as people said today, it's kind of a lean or bare structure. Compared to the Kalidasa plays, it's kind of laconic and short and brief. And that's not an accident. That's because it was meant to allow the elaboration
and people to fill in rather than fill in yourself.
Actually, I'll say something, we may not agree with this, but I always tell my students, this is a different kind of textuality. When we look at the Kutiyattam texts that we have, it's a different model than what we have in classical Sanskrit kavya, for example, or anything like that. I think the Arthaprakaram precedes the written text, actually, in the sense, that's what I think. I mean, not in a technical way, but the truth is that that world of the Arthaprakaram, that is to say, all the things that go into that, including the additional materials that come in, and the elaborations and the meaning of it, it somehow I think that's the world that fashioned the actual Sanskrit text that we have. I think of the Sanskrit text of Shaktibhadra as a kind of condensation of a pre-existing kind of world of the theater, which survived into the Atta Prakaram.
It's a very interesting concept,
Yeah,
very interesting theory.
yeah. So not everyone will agree with this, but
and I think more about it.
Yeah, and I've
from
said
that
it.
perspective, perhaps.
I've said it in a kind of slightly exaggerated way, but something like that. In other words, to take what I would call the Mediterranean textual model, which is that you have the text, and the text it expands a little, then it expands a little more, and then that doesn't fit this Kutiyattam world. No, it doesn't fit.
Something to think of, I think.
You can also see another interesting thing. If you see if the live performance is your criterion, then there are many points where you can see that the written text, published text of the play depends upon the elaboration in the performance. It makes no sense without what they actually do on stage. You can read it, of course, you can it has some kind of meaning, but the real point of it only comes through with the full elaboration in the performance. It illuminates the text in a way which must have been there before the text was there. That's what I think.
Also, perhaps the complementary exchange that takes place between the performer and whoever is supporting patron or interested spectator, the Sahardaya, that also must have worked its way for embellishing and putting, do you think?
No doubt it did. Of course it did. Yeah.
So also, how much does it? For example, these plays were connected to the temple and to very, very specific rituals, and it was confined within the temple, and also to a certain extent, some other castes were not really part of the. Do you think that kind of confinement also may have? In a very strange way, contributed to the growth of Kutiyattam in those days?
I'm sure it contributed to the growth. It's a kind of temple art. In a way, it's a temple art. I don't agree with my friend Dr. Paulos, who thinks that initially this was a courtly production.
Yes, that's absolutely. I have seen Nana Loka and
Prekshaka.
Prekshaka.
Nana Loka and Prekshaka, they're there. The terms are there in the Vyangya Vyakya.
Yes.
But I think this was an art that was very heavily connected to the ritual. Even today, on the so-called secular stage, it's still very heavily ritualized. And I don't think you can understand the play if you put the ritual aside. That's another way of beginning to talk about it also. You could say, what is the actor doing? What is this Kutiyattam actor doing? You look at the Purapade, he somehow brings into being a whole world, actually, a whole universe. He creates it little by little, piece by piece, ties it, each piece when he finishes. In the end, offers flowers that can't be seen. And then he sustains and repairs and holds this world in place over the period of the performance, which could be a week or 2 weeks or a month, whatever it is. And at the very end, he takes it apart.
Yes.
That shows you something about what they're trying to do, and also something about the sort of claim on our. How shall I say it, on our understanding of the world, and what is real, what counts as real, and all of those kinds of things, It's a very strong ritual theater. That doesn't mean that it's not an aesthetic production in its own right. It is. Madhu always, emphasizes the aesthetic drive behind it, and I accept that. I think that's true. It's a great work of art, but its actual initial setting and context is surely the temple, I think.
But it is also a theatre, a theatre of possibilities in an international way. I mean, it's a universal language, which can be applied to different contexts and different cultural settings, perhaps.
It can be,
adapted. So to that extent, I think it has immense possibilities for the future of theatre research also.
I am happy, first of all, to see that in this generation the performers are happy to experiment, some of them.
Yes.
So that there's a Kutiyattam Macbeth, we've seen it actually.
Yes, yes, yes.
And the travels, I've actually traveled all over the world. The Nepati group came to Israel, and I met them last year in Yale. There's no doubt that if you explain the basics of it, even to an audience that knows nothing at all, they are quite capable of being captivated by it.
Yes, yes.
Absolutely, yeah.
Also something like Hamlet, for example, with the stream of consciousness approach, I think it is very suited to something like Kutiyattam to expand that mental conflict, and I feel...
Yeah, it is. I think it is, actually. I mean, we saw the Macbeth, we saw it in the DVD. The Macbeth has only one verse. One of the Shakespeare verses was translated in a very creative way into Sanskrit. Our friend Sanish, I think, did it. And it's a verse which looks as if it were picked at random from the middle of the play, like in Kutiyattam,
Then back to Nirvahanam.
From somewhere in the third thing, and it goes back into a Nirvahanam, all of the thing develops. It was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. I showed it to the students in Jerusalem. We did a course on theater, and they loved it, actually,
Also, what are your thoughts on how this kind of an art is going to sustain in the future? Looks very challenging in its future, because one thing, the performance, this huge universe, as you mentioned, is all there, but very little research on a contemporary basis is getting done. Secondly, even the audience base is also shrinking, and how many people do have the kind of patience and the understanding? I mean, there is some cause of concern when you look at, because there are individual acts are very, that is one way of doing it. People have taken small portions. But what about the...
There's no doubt that this is an endangered tradition. There's no doubt, of course. All of the actors that I've met and talked to, they're all deeply worried about this. What is going to happen? How it's hanging by a thread, you could say. On the other hand, I have to say I'm personally very optimistic about the future of Kutiyattam. I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. See, of course, it's true that they need support. They lack support. They need support that has to come from somewhere. It looks to me like the government is not going to give that support at the level that it's required. Really, what would be best would be a kind of some wealthy patrons or something like that, like in the old times, actually. Why not? That would be the best. But even without that, if I look around, let's say in Kerala today, how many proficient Kutiyattam actors are there? 30, 35?
Not more.
Something like that.
More.
Okay. But I'm not sure that there were more in the medieval period. I'm not sure. Maybe a little more. I don't know. Maybe not. This has always been an art that, it had a limited audience of connoisseurs. Of course, these people were living from the temple.
The difference was that these people were protected by the temple.
They were protected. They were part of the old temple economy and the old Kerala economy, so their future was secure in that respect. Now
they had all the time to devote to honing their skills and their art. Here, it's not like that.
It's very, look, I see in Murikulam, we know the Nepati group very well. So I see that the young performers, they spend many years learning to perform, and huge amounts of money. Actually, rather small amounts of money would keep the whole thing going easily into the next generation. So, I mean, I can't say I'm not worried. I'm worried about it, but I'm also optimistic about it, actually.
That's wonderful. Will you be coming next year also? Will this continue?
I hope so. We're at the end of one funding cycle. We're at the end of a grant that we had. We had a very nice grant from something called the German Israel Foundation, because the University of Tübingen, Heike, and the University of Jerusalem, the Hebrew University, are partners in this. So that's a true German-Israeli collaboration, and has proved itself very fruitful. And a lot, I think, is coming out of that. But this was a 3-year grant. It's ending now in 2015. we will reapply to them, and they have a category like that for grant renewals. If they give it to us, then we'll have another 2 or 3 years, If they don't give it to us, we'll find some other way, but yes, we will come. We will
It's
come.
a very positive thought, and thank you so much for talking to me.
Very welcome, yes. Nice to talk to you.